My name is Stanley Higgs, and I am 67 years old. I retired not long ago after 43 years as a building inspector in Manhattan. All my life, I've inspected foundations, slabs, and compliance with project documents. Not the most romantic profession, but I know every stone in this city. How many times developers have tried to bribe me to turn a blind eye to violations. But I have always been principled and never gave in. Maybe that's why I didn't become a boss, but I always slept well. Our house on East 78th Street I bought back in the 80s, when this neighborhood was just beginning to become prestigious. Or rather, we bought it with Evelyn, my wife. 4 bedrooms, a spacious living room with a fireplace, a small backyard. A property like this would cost a fortune nowadays. But back then, thanks to my savings and Evelyn's small inheritance, we could afford it, and we've never regretted it. Evelyn passed away 5 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. It happened so fast I didn't even realize I was alone in our big house. She was an elementary school teacher, loved children. We only had one child, our son Christopher. Sometimes I think we spoiled him too much. After Evelyn died, I got caught up in my work. I came home late, often taking extra shifts. The empty house was unbearably quiet. Evelyn's pictures were on the mantelpiece. Her things were still in the closet. I couldn't bring myself to put them away. On weekends, I usually visited my old friend Atticus or went to the chess club in the park. Life went on, albeit in a lower gear. About a year after Evelyn's funeral, Christopher announced that he was getting married. His chosen one's name was Lorelei Parkinson, and she worked as a receptionist at some fancy fitness club. I met her at their engagement party, a slender, always impeccably dressed woman with cold eyes and a strained smile. She was 4 years younger than Christopher, 34 at the time. I can't say she made a particular impression on me, but her son seemed happy, and that was the main thing. After the wedding, Christopher and Lorelei rented a small apartment in Chelsea. He had been working for several years as an insurance specialist for a large company. Not a bad career, although I always thought he could have done better with his abilities. Evelyn spoiled him, and I was too busy working. Perhaps we should have been stricter. About 6 months after the wedding, Christopher called me and said he wanted to discuss an important matter. He came alone without Lorelei, and over a cup of coffee told me that their landlord had drastically raised their rent and they were looking for a new place to live. "Dad," he said, nervously fiddling with his cup, "you have such a big house and you live alone. Lorelei and I were thinking, maybe we could move in with you. Temporarily, of course, till we could save up for a down payment on a place of our own." I remember freezing when I heard that suggestion. Our house was filled with memories of Evelyn, and the thought of another woman entering it felt like a betrayal. But on the other hand, I did live alone in a large house, and perhaps the presence of my son could help me out of my lingering mourning. "What did Lorelei think about it?" I asked cautiously. "Oh, she's all for it," Christopher answered quickly. "She says she could help you around the house, cook sometimes. You know how good a cook she is." I didn't really know how good Lorelei cooked. In the few times we'd seen each other, she'd never invited me over for dinner or brought me home-baked goods. But I nodded and agreed. After all, this is my son, and the house is big enough for all of us. They moved in a week later. Christopher took his old room, and the guest room was converted into a bedroom for both of them. The first weeks were strange. I'd gotten used to a certain routine, to the quiet in the mornings, to my little rituals. Now there was always someone in the house, voices, dishes clattering. Lorelei immediately began to make changes in the interior. At first it was little things, new curtains, decorative cushions on the couch, pictures on the walls. I didn't mind, although sometimes I thought she purposely chose things that Evelyn wouldn't like. My late wife liked quiet tones and classic style, while Lorelei preferred bright colors and modern design. Gradually, the atmosphere in the house changed. Lorelei used to say "our house" instead of "your house" more and more, as if trying to stake out a territory. She invited her friends over for tea and spent hours in the living room with them, loudly discussing the latest fitness club gossip. When I entered the room, the conversations would subside, and I could feel their appraising glances on me. Christopher was spending more and more time at work. He came home late, tired, and usually went straight to bed. We hardly spoke at all, except for duty greetings and discussions of the weather. Sometimes it seemed to me that he avoided being alone with me, as if he were afraid of some kind of conversation. One evening, about 5 months after they moved in, I walked into the kitchen for a glass of water and heard Lorelei and Christopher arguing in their room. I don't usually eavesdrop on other people's conversations, but my name, spoken in Lorelei's irritated voice, made me freeze. "How much longer are we going to live with your father?" she said. "He watches my every move, criticizes everything I do. This house is like your mother's museum. I can't breathe in here." "Lori, please." Christopher's voice sounded tired. "We had a deal. As soon as we save enough." "And when will that be? A year? 2? 5? I can't go on like this. It's either him or me." I went quietly back to my room, forgetting about the glass of water. Inside, everything clenched with resentment and disappointment. I never criticized the Lorelei, never interfered in their affairs. On the contrary, I tried to be inconspicuous in my own home, giving them space. And this is her gratitude? After that conversation, his relationship with Lorelei became even more strained. She stopped even pretending to be friendly. Whereas before she'd at least ask me how my day was going, now she could defiantly leave the room when I entered. She moved the pictures of Evelyn from the mantel to the far shelf in the living room, and when I returned them to their place, she rolled her eyes and muttered something about old people living in the past. Christopher held himself aloof. Sometimes I thought there was a flicker of guilt in his eyes, but he quickly averted his gaze and found an excuse to leave. He spent more and more time at work, sometimes even on weekends. I didn't recognize my son. Where had that open, kind boy that Evelyn and I had raised gone? I continued to work, even though I was only a few months away from retirement. Work was my salvation. I felt needed, respected. I was one of the most experienced inspectors in the department, and younger colleagues often came to me for advice. At home, I felt superfluous within my own walls. At the same time, I did not complain about financial difficulties. All my life, I was a thrifty person. Not stingy, I didn't deny myself the necessities, and I didn't count every penny. But I always set aside a portion of my paycheck and invested my money wisely. I had shares in several stable companies, a small package of bonds and deposits in reliable banks. Besides, the house I bought years ago was now worth several times its value. Christopher and Lorelei, however, thought I was just a cheapskate. They saw that I preferred to wear the same jacket for many years, that I fixed minor repairs in the house myself instead of calling a handyman, that I scrutinized discounts at the supermarket. They didn't realize that this frugality allowed me to save a significant amount of money, and I was in no hurry to enlighten them. Something told me that Lorelei would take too much interest in my finances if she knew the real state of them. I remember one day, as I was preparing for retirement, I was on the phone with my financial advisor, Brad. We were discussing how best to reorganize my investment portfolio to accommodate my change in status. I didn't notice Lorelei walk into the room. She stopped in the doorway upon hearing our conversation, and her eyes narrowed. I quickly said goodbye to Brad and hung up the phone. "Do you have a financial advisor?" she asked incredulously. "Why? To help me save money on coffee?" "Everyone needs professional advice," I answered evasively, "even if it's a small amount of money." She snorted and left the room. But from that day on, I noticed that she listened more closely to my phone conversations and sometimes peeked into my office when she thought I wasn't home. I started keeping all my important documents in a safe in the garage and became more careful in my conversations. That's how we lived, in the same house but as if in parallel worlds. I spent more and more time in my office or in the garage where I had a small workshop. Lorelei ruled the living room and kitchen. Christopher tossed between us, trying to maintain a semblance of family harmony, but I could see it was wearing him down. And then the day of my retirement arrived. My colleagues threw me a little party, gave me a nice whiskey and an engraved wristwatch. I was touched by their attention. I returned home in high spirits, despite some sadness at the thought that I would no longer be part of the team. A cold reception awaited me at home. Lorelei didn't even congratulate me on my retirement. Christopher mumbled something about how now I would be able to rest and pursue my hobbies, but there was no genuine joy in his voice. I sensed something was brewing, and I was right. The first week of retirement turned out to be strange. I could wake up without an alarm clock, no rushing around, no checking the mail early in the morning. But instead of a sense of freedom, I felt empty. For 43 years, every morning I put on a shirt and tie and went to check out construction projects. And now it was like my life had stopped. I tried to find new things to do. Spent more time in the garage tidying up my workbench. I started going for long walks in the neighborhood. I joined a chess club where I played on Thursdays. But the house was getting more and more uncomfortable. Lorelei seemed annoyed by my very presence. Before, when I came home from work in the evening, she could at least be polite. Now that I was home all the time, her hostility came out in the open. "Are you sitting in the living room all day again?" she asked me a week after I retired, while I was reading the paper in my chair. "Why don't you find something to do? Go to the park? Sit on a bench with other retirees?" I silently folded the paper and went to my office. I didn't want to start a fight. Evelyn had always said I had a temper, and I'd tried to hold back, especially in recent years. But Lorelei wasn't going to leave me alone. The next day, she announced that she wanted to convert my office into a yoga room. "You're just going through books in there anyway," she said over breakfast, "and I need space to practice. It's a long drive to the fitness club, but here I could invite my girlfriends." "This is my office," I said calmly, "and I'm not going to vacate it." "Yours, yours," she mocked. "Everything in this house is yours. Chris and I are like temporary tenants. We've lived here for over 3 years, by the way." She sounded resentful, as if it were my fault that they hadn't bought their own place yet. They could have saved up for a down payment if it hadn't been for Lorelei's habit of spending money on designer clothes and vacations at expensive resorts. Christopher, as usual, was silent. He sat staring at his cell phone, pretending not to hear our conversation. It wasn't until Lorelei abruptly got up from the table and walked out of the kitchen that he looked up and looked at me guiltily. "I'm sorry, Dad. She's just nervous about work. She's got a new boss. They don't get along." "You shouldn't apologize for your wife, son," I answered. "You should talk to her yourself." He nodded, but I could see there would be no conversation. Christopher avoided conflict at all costs. He'd been the same way when he was a kid, never argued with teachers. Even when they were wrong, never got into school fights, preferred to give his lunch to a bully rather than confront him. Evelyn saw it as a kindness. I saw it as weakness. The tension in the house grew every day. Lorelei began inviting her friends over almost daily. They would gather in the living room and talk loudly about their business, as if trying to drive me out of the common areas. Increasingly, I stayed in my bedroom or left for the day so I wouldn't have to hear their laughter and gossip. One day I came home after a chess tournament and found that Evelyn's pictures had disappeared from the mantelpiece. In their place were some abstract figurines and candles and glass candlesticks. "Where are the pictures of my wife?" I asked Lorelei, who was sitting on the couch with a magazine. "Oh, those old pictures." She didn't even look up from the page. "I put them away in a box in the attic. Chris and I were sick of living in a mausoleum." "It's been 5 years, Stanley. It's time to move on." I felt the blood rush to my face. I'd never wanted to hit a man so badly in my life. I clenched my fists and took a deep breath. "You have no right to put things away in my house," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Put the pictures back where they belonged." "Or what?" She finally pulled away from the magazine and looked at me defiantly. "You're going to kick us out? Tell your son to choose between you and me?" "Go ahead, try it." There was so much venom in her eyes that I backed off. I didn't want to put Christopher through that choice. I silently went up to the attic, found the box of photos, and took them to my bedroom. At least Lorelei wasn't in there yet. When Christopher returned from work, I tried to talk to him about the incident, but he just sighed tiredly and said, "Dad, please don't start. I've been dealing with a problem client all day, and my head is pounding." "Lori's right. We all need to move on. Mom wouldn't want us to live in the past." "Don't tell me what your mother would want," I said sharply. "You're not even trying to protect her." "Protect her from what? From death?" There was bitterness in his voice. "She's dead, Dad, and there's nothing we can do about it." He left for his and Lorelei's bedroom, and I remained standing in the hallway, feeling betrayed by my own son. The next day, Lorelei launched another attack. She walked into my office without knocking as I was checking my investments online and placed a brochure on my desk. "What's this?" I asked, quickly closing the bank account tab. "Sunny Days," she replied with fake concern in her voice. "A very nice retirement home. They have medical staff, organize excursions, creative circles. You'll like it there." I looked at the glossy brochure with pictures of smiling seniors playing board games and felt a wave of anger rising inside. Are you suggesting I move into a nursing home? I asked quietly. In my own home? Don't exaggerate, Stanley. She rolled her eyes. It's not a nursing home. It's a state-of-the-art senior center. You'll have your own apartment, socializing with people your own age, and Chris and I can finally have a normal life. I'm not going anywhere. I pushed the brochure aside, and I'd ask you to step out of my office. You're so stubborn, she sighed. No wonder Chris is so rarely home. He can't take the strain. You're making your own son miserable. Do you realize that? She walked out, leaving the door open. I got up to close it and heard Lorelei talking on the phone. Yes, can you imagine? He refuses to even consider it. He sits in his office all day long, doing nothing but counting his money. What money? His measly pension? What else? This cheapskate has been saving for his old age all his life, and now he's afraid to spend a dime. I closed the door quietly and sat down at the table. Lorelei had clearly underestimated my finances, and it was for the best. I decided to contact my attorney and check on the ownership of the house. I thought I had listed Christopher as a co-owner after Evelyn died, but I needed to be sure. A call to the lawyer confirmed my fears. The house was titled to me and Christopher, each owning 50%. That meant Lorelei had certain rights to the property through Christopher. I couldn't just kick them out. In the evening of the same day, a new incident occurred. I discovered that some of the things in my bedroom had been rearranged. The dresser drawer where I kept my papers was ajar. Nothing was missing. I always kept the really important papers in a safe, but the very fact that Lorelei was going through my things infuriated me. When Christopher returned from work, I demanded a conversation with him and his wife. We gathered in the living room, where Lorelei plopped defiantly on the couch and Christopher sat on the edge of the chair, looking uncomfortable. Today I found someone going through my things, I began, looking directly at Lorelei. I want to know why. I was just cleaning, she shrugged. This house is due for a cleanup. There's so much junk that's accumulated over the years. You can't go into my bedroom without permission, I said firmly, and you can't touch my stuff. Dad, Lori wanted to help, Christopher interjected. Why make a big deal out of it? The problem is that I'm being disrespected in my own home, I replied. First your mother's pictures, now my personal belongings. What's next? Oh my God, 25 again. Lorelei rolled her eyes theatrically. Chris, I told you it was useless. He'll never change. He'll always cling to the past, to his old things, to his rules. Meanwhile, you and I are living our best years in this crypt. Lori, please, Christopher grumbled. Let's all just calm down. No, I'm not going to calm down. She abruptly sat up straight. I'm tired of tiptoeing around this house. I'm tired of pretending everything's okay. We've lived here for over 3 years, Chris, and we still don't have our own space. Your father controls our every move, our every breath. It's unbearable. If it's so hard for you to live in my house, I said coldly, maybe you should look for another place to live. It was a mistake. Lorelei was just waiting for such a suggestion. Maybe you should find another place to live, she blurted out. You're retired. You don't need to live in Midtown Manhattan. You could move somewhere a little farther away, somewhere quieter, cheaper. Chris and I could stay here and take care of the house. Lori, Christopher exclaimed. What are you talking about? The truth, darling, she said, not even embarrassed. Your father is 70 years old. 67, I corrected her. Doesn't matter. You're an old man, Stanley. You need rest, care. And this house is too big for one person. It's unsustainable. I'm not going anywhere, I said firmly. This is my house. I bought it with Evelyn 40 years ago, paid the mortgage every month, kept it in good condition. And I'm not going to give it to you just because you think it's rational. Do you hear that, Chris? Lorelei turned to her husband. He's never going to leave voluntarily. He's going to cling to this house until his last breath, and we're going to serve him like we're not family, but hired help. I can't take it anymore. She cried suddenly, covering her face with her hands. Christopher immediately rushed to her, hugging and comforting her. It's going to be all right, darling, he murmured. We'll figure something out. I watched the scene and felt disgusted. Lorelei was clearly manipulating my son, and he was giving in like a naive schoolboy. You know what, Stanley, she said, suddenly stopping crying and looking at me through her fingers. There's no place for you in this house. Chris and I have decided we've had enough. You have to move out by the end of the month. What? I couldn't believe my ears. You can't kick me out of my own house? Actually, we can. She smiled a cold smile. Half of the house belongs to Chris, and I'm his wife. We have rights. I turned to my son, expecting him to object, to say it was all nonsense. But Christopher was staring at the floor, avoiding my gaze. Christopher, I called out, do you really want to kick me out of the house? Dad, understand, he mumbled, still not looking at me. Lori's right. You'll be better off in an institution. You'll be taken care of there. You'll have socialization with people your own age. Since when is 70 years old? I interrupted. I'm in good health. I'm independent. I don't need care. And I wouldn't move into a nursing home even if I were 90. I've worked my whole life to give my mother and then you, a decent life. And now you want to throw me away like a piece of junk? Don't be so dramatic, Stanley, Lorelai interjected. Nobody's throwing you out. We're offering a civilized solution. After all, we could just sell the house and split the money. But we're willing to keep it and help you move. What generosity, I remarked sarcastically. Did you ever think I might sue? I own this house as much as Christopher does. Courts take years, Lorelai shrugged, and you don't have that many left. Sorry to be blunt. Besides, any judge will be on our side. A young family against a lonely old man who refuses to accept help. I looked at Christopher, who was still avoiding my gaze. I could see how uncomfortable he was, but he didn't contradict his wife, didn't defend me. In that moment, I realized I'd lost my son. Not today. It had happened much earlier, when he'd allowed Lorelai to come into our house and start making her rules. Okay, I said calmly. I'll leave, but don't expect me to support you afterward. No financial aid, no Christmas presents, nothing. Oh, sure, threaten, Lorelai mimed fear. What can you give us out of your miserable pension? We make twice as much as you do now. I didn't say anything. Let them think what they want. Soon they'll know the truth, but it'll be too late. Dad, Christopher finally looked up. We don't want to part on bad terms. It's just better for everyone. I'll visit you, I promise. Don't bother, I replied. I'll have my things packed by the end of the week. I stood up and headed out of the living room. I turned around at the door and looked at them, the son I'd raised and the woman who destroyed our family. They were sitting on the couch, holding hands, and I could see the triumphant smile on Lorelai's face. She had won. At least that's what she thought. I spent the next 3 days sorting through things. It's amazing how over decades of living in one house, so much stuff accumulates. Every little thing held memories, every book, every old shirt had a story. I decided to take only the essentials and things that had special value to me. The rest could be left for safekeeping with Atticus, my old friend, or reacquired. Christopher and Lorelai were hardly ever at home these days. I caught glimpses of them in the mornings, when they were hurrying to work, and late in the evenings, when they returned and immediately shut themselves in their room. Maybe they were ashamed, or maybe they just didn't want to see me again. That was fine with me. I didn't feel like talking to them either. I didn't sleep much last night. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about how things had changed. This house used to be full of happiness. Evelyn and I were having breakfast in the small kitchen, discussing plans for the day. Christopher, then a little boy, would run through the hallways playing his games. We had family dinners every Sunday. Even when my son left for college, he always came to visit us on the weekends. Now I'm being kicked out of my own home, and my son isn't even trying to protect me. In the morning, I packed the last of my belongings and called a cab. 4 large suitcases were all that was left of my old life. Christopher had already left for work, and Lorelai was sitting in the kitchen, sipping her morning smoothie when I walked down the stairs for the last time. Leaving already? She asked, not looking up from her phone. I thought you were staying until the end of the week. No point in delaying the inevitable, I answered dryly. I've already packed everything I wanted to take. The rest you can throw away or keep. She nodded, still not looking at me. My presence in the house was clearly nothing more than an unpleasant formality that had to be endured. Chris wanted to say goodbye to you, she said finally. He said to tell you he'd call you tonight. No need. I took the house keys from the table in the hallway and put them next to her cup. I'll contact him myself when I'm ready. She finally raised her eyes and looked at me. Not a shadow of regret, just the cold satisfaction of a man who had gotten his way. Good luck, Stanley, she said with a fake smile. I hope you find a place where you feel comfortable. I didn't reply. I just turned and walked out of the house, closing the door behind me. The cab driver was already waiting for me, helping me load my suitcases into the trunk. Where are we going? He asked as I got into the car. To the Residence Inn on 3rd Avenue, I answered. It was an inexpensive hotel with apartments where I'd booked a room for 2 weeks, just enough time to find permanent lodging. When the cab pulled away, I didn't look back. I didn't want to remember my house that way, alien, cold, with Lorelei instead of Evelyn in the kitchen. I preferred to remember it the way it used to be, filled with love and laughter. The hotel room was more spacious than I expected. A small living room, a bedroom, a kitchenette, everything I needed for a temporary stay. I laid out my things, hung my suits in the closet, put Evelyn's pictures on the bedside table. This place wasn't a home, but for the next 2 weeks it would be my haven. After settling in, I called Brad, my financial advisor. We had been working together for over 20 years, ever since I started investing my savings in earnest. Brad was a young professional then, just starting his career. Now he has his own firm, and I'm one of his oldest clients. Stanley, he cheered when he heard my voice. How are you doing? How's retirement? I was kicked out of my own house when I retired, I answered without preamble. My son and his wife thought I was in the way. What? Brad was clearly taken aback. But how could they? The house is half yours. Technically, yes, I sighed. But you know, suing your own son. Yeah, it's not easy, Brad agreed. What are you planning to do? Look for a new place to live, preferably away from Manhattan. I looked out the window at the hustle and bustle of the city. I'm tired of this anthill. I want quiet, space, fresh air. I might have an interesting proposition for you. Brad's voice became businesslike. Remember those tech stocks I recommended you buy 5 years ago? They've shown fantastic growth. Your investment portfolio has almost quadrupled in that time. I whistled. I knew my investments had been successful, but I didn't expect such growth. How much do I have in my account now? I asked, sitting down on the edge of the bed. Brad gave me a figure that took my breath away. It wasn't like I was a billionaire, but it was enough to live a very comfortable life for the rest of my life. And there would be a decent inheritance, an inheritance I wouldn't leave to Christopher. I want to buy a house, I said, when the initial shock wore off. A nice house, not in the city, maybe in Connecticut or Westchester. That's a great idea, Brad said. In fact, I know a realtor who specializes in those kinds of properties. Can I give him your number? Sure, I agreed. And Brad, I'd like to change my will. That's what I thought, he said with a smile. I have contacts for some good lawyers. I'll send you the information. After talking to Brad, I could breathe a little easier. Yes, I'd been kicked out of my home, betrayed by my own son. But I have the means to start a new life, and that makes a big difference. That same day, I got a call from my realtor, Patrick Norris. We agreed to meet the next morning at his office to discuss my wishes and look at options. Patrick turned out to be an energetic man of about 45, with a bright smile and genuine enthusiasm. He listened carefully to all my wishes. A spacious house near New York, but in a quiet place, preferably with a garden, maybe even with a small lake or pond. I have several options that might suit you, he said, looking at something on his tablet. But there is one particular property that just came on the market. I think you should see it first. He showed me pictures of an elegant 2-story Georgian-style house on a 5-acre lot in suburban Greenwich, Connecticut. It had a brick facade, white columns, and large windows overlooking a manicured garden and a small lake. Inside, the rooms are spacious with high ceilings, wood floors, and classic details. It looks gorgeous, I admitted, leafing through the photos. But it must have cost a fortune. Actually, the price is very reasonable for a property like this, Patrick assured me. The owners are divorced and want to sell the house as soon as possible. They are willing to give a good discount for a serious buyer. He quoted an amount that was considerable, but well within my means, especially after what Brad had told me. When can we see it? I asked, already feeling that it was exactly what I was looking for. Tonight, if you're free, Patrick smiled. I can take you there this afternoon. I agreed, and a few hours later we were driving in his comfortable SUV toward Greenwich. Along the way, Patrick talked about the neighborhood, an upscale suburb of New York City with good schools, low crime rates, and good infrastructure. Manhattan was an hour away by car or train. When we drove up to the house, I realized that the pictures didn't capture half of its splendor. It stood on a small hill, surrounded by century-old oaks and maples. A graceful driveway, lined with hydrangea bushes, led to the front entrance. The garden was not just manicured, it was a work of art, with elaborate flower beds, neatly trimmed hedges, and cozy seating areas. Inside, the house was even more impressive. Spacious hall with marble floor and elegant staircase leading to the second floor. A living room with a fireplace, a library, a dining room, a modern kitchen. Everything was decorated tastefully, without excessive pretentiousness, but with attention to detail. There are 5 bedrooms on the second floor, each with its own bathroom, Patrick said as we climbed the stairs. The master bedroom has access to a terrace overlooking the lake. I walked through the rooms, touching the walls, looking out the windows, and felt as if this house was embracing me, inviting me to stay. There were no ghosts of the past here, no painful memories, just peace and a chance to start anew. The house has another advantage, Patrick said as we stepped out into the garden. It's fully furnished. The owners are willing to leave all the furniture if you want it. Of course, you can always replace anything you don't like, but it will allow you to move in almost immediately. We reached a small gazebo by the lake, and I stopped, admiring the view. The sun reflected in the water, creating a dance of glare. The tops of other houses could be seen in the distance, but they were far enough away to not disturb the solitude. The silence, broken only by the singing of birds and the rustling of leaves, seemed a real cure after the noise of the city. "I'll take it," I said, without further thought. "When can we finalize the deal?" Patrick didn't hide his surprise. Usually clients looked at several properties, compared them, haggled. But I knew I'd found exactly what I was looking for. "We can start the process tomorrow," he said, coming to his senses. "We'll need to check the documents. Arrange a loan if you need one." "No credit," I interrupted him. "I'm ready to pay the full amount at once." Now Patrick looked truly stunned, but he quickly pulled himself together and smiled professionally. "In that case, the process will be much simpler. I'll contact the owners today and let them know about your offer. If they agree, we can finalize the deal within a week." On the drive back to town, I felt unusually excited. For the first time in a long time, I looked forward to the future with hope. This house would be my new beginning, a place where I could live out my remaining years in peace and dignity. Back at the hotel, I called Brad and told him of my decision. He fully supported my choice and promised to help me organize the transfer of money for the purchase. "Just don't tell Christopher about your finances," he advised. Until the deal was finalized, it was best to keep it a secret. I agreed, even though Christopher hadn't tried to contact me. No call, no message. It was as if I ceased to exist for him the moment I closed the door of the house behind me. The next week was a busy one. I met with lawyers, signed documents, transferred money. The homeowners accepted my offer without bargaining and even agreed to a small discount to speed up the process. 9 days after I saw the house for the first time, it was officially mine. The day I got the keys, Patrick personally drove me to Greenwich. My suitcases were loaded into the trunk of his SUV, and I felt like I was in a movie, a hero starting a new life. "Congratulations, Mr. Higgs," Patrick said, handing me the keys at the front door. "Welcome to your new home." I thanked him and shook his hand. When he left, I was alone in front of my new home. I took a deep breath of the fresh country air and slowly inserted the key into the lock. The door opened with a quiet click, and I stepped over the threshold. I spent the first few days in my new home, settling in and getting used to the new rhythm of life. The furniture left by the previous owners was elegant and comfortable, but some things I decided to replace with things more to my taste. I ordered a new sofa for the living room, bookcases for the library, some appliances for the kitchen. Every morning I woke up at sunrise, had a cup of coffee on the terrace overlooking the lake, and then went for a long walk around the neighborhood. In the afternoons, I usually read in the library or worked in the garden. Evenings were spent by the fireplace with a glass of good whiskey and listening to classical music. Gradually, I began to get to know my neighbors. The closest were the Elliots, an elderly couple living in a similar house across the street. Sylvia Elliott, a former teacher like Evelyn, invited me over for tea when she saw me looking around her garden. We had a pleasant conversation, and she introduced me to her husband, Howard, a retired history professor. It's not often we get new faces in our neighborhood, Sylvia said as she poured the tea, especially single gentlemen. Most of the houses here are owned by couples with children, Howard added, or old farts like us. I laughed and told them a little about myself, about my work as an inspector, my retirement. I didn't tell them about Christopher and Lorelei, only that I'd decided to move out of the city in search of peace and quiet. You'll like it here, Sylvia assured me. Greenwich is the perfect place for a quiet life. And if you want the hustle and bustle of the city, New York is always close by. In the nearest town, I found a cozy cafe where I could drink a good coffee and read the morning paper, and a small bookstore with an excellent selection of literature. I soon became a regular customer there. The owner of the store, an elderly gentleman named Theodore, turned out to be an avid chess player, and we agreed to play sometimes in the evenings when there were few customers in the store. I felt myself slowly coming back to life. The pain of my son's betrayal was not completely gone, but it was quieter, receding into the background. I no longer woke up at night with feelings of anger and resentment. Instead, I enjoyed every new day, every little thing, the birds singing outside my window, the smell of freshly cut grass, the taste of apples freshly plucked from the tree. As time passed, I grew more and more accustomed to my new home and my new life. I didn't try to contact Christopher, and he didn't call me. Sometimes I thought of him living in my old house with Lorelei, and felt bitter. But more often, I just rejoiced in the peace and freedom I now had. One day, about a month after the move, I got a call from Brad. "You're not going to believe this, Stanley," he said with a hint of amusement in his voice. "I got a call from your son. He was looking for you." "What did you tell him?" I asked, tense. "Just that you were okay and living in the suburbs," Brad answered. "Nothing specific, like we agreed." He seemed troubled. Why? Was it a guilty conscience? I couldn't hide my sarcasm. "I don't know," Brad paused, "but he was very insistent on asking for your address. Said he wanted to apologize in person." I grinned. "Apologize? After kicking me out of my own house? That doesn't sound right." "Thanks for not telling him where I lived," I thanked Brad. "I'm not ready to meet him yet." "I understand," he said. "But you know, maybe you should give him a chance. After all, he is your son." "We'll see," I said evasively. "But not now. Right now, I just wanted to enjoy my new life. And I did enjoy it. Every day in my new home brought small joys and discoveries. I learned how to cook dishes I had never tried before. Started practicing yoga on Sylvia's recommendation. I made friends with the neighbor's Labrador, who came to my terrace every morning for treats. Life went on, and for the first time in a long time, I was truly happy and at peace. It had been a month since I had settled into my new home. I had already fully settled in and was enjoying the measured life in the suburbs. Every morning I woke up to birdsong, had breakfast on the terrace, admired my garden, and then did chores or went for a walk. In the evenings, I read books by the fireplace or played chess with Theodore in his bookstore. It was the quiet life filled with small joys that I had dreamed of. One of those days, I got a call from Atticus, an old friend of mine, whom we had been friends since high school. He was the only one I told about my new home and gave me the address. "Stanley, you won't believe what's happened," he began without preamble when I answered the phone. "Christopher came by with that wife of his." I tensed. Christopher hadn't tried to contact me since the day I left home. Not a call, not a text. Now all of a sudden he's looking for me? What did they want? I asked, trying to sound indifferent. "Looking for you, of course," Atticus snorted. "First they were poking around, asking how I was doing, how I was doing, how I was feeling. And then that sister-in-law of yours started asking if I knew where you lived. They're so worried they can't find you for a month." "And what did you tell them?" "What could I say?" Atticus had a chuckle in his voice. "I told them you're fine. You live somewhere in the suburbs, but I don't know your exact address. I remembered that you asked me not to reveal that information." "Thanks, buddy," I said sincerely. "I don't want them on my doorstep. At least not yet." I understand, Atticus said. But you know what the best part was? When I told her you lived in the suburbs, Lorelei interjected, "In my own house?" And when I confirmed it, she literally turned green. I'd never seen that look on her face. I chuckled as I pictured it. Lorelei must have thought I was renting some cheap apartment on my pension. The news that I had my own house must have come as an unpleasant surprise to her. "Did they ask you anything else?" I inquired. "Oh, yes," Atticus laughed. "Your sister-in-law immediately started asking what kind of house you had, in what neighborhood, how many rooms." I said I didn't know the details, but from what I understood from your stories, it was a very decent house. She immediately became, uh, interested, and your son looked just confused, as if he couldn't understand where you got the money to buy a house. After that conversation, I waited for Christopher to try to contact me directly. And indeed, 2 days later, he called. I saw his name on the phone screen and hesitated for a long time before answering. But in the end, I decided to find out what he wanted. "Dad?" His voice sounded unsure when I finally picked up the phone. "It's me, Chris. How are you?" "I'm fine," I answered dryly. "What do you want?" "Yeah, Lori and I are just worried about you," he said after a short pause. "You disappeared without leaving an address. You haven't called. You haven't written. And you decided to start looking for me only after a month?" I couldn't hide my sarcasm. "How touching." "Dad, please," he sounded pleading. "We're really worried. Atticus said you bought a house in the suburbs. Is that true?" "Yes." I saw no point in denying it. "I have my own place now." "But, how?" he blurted out. I mean, it's great. It's just unexpected. We thought you were, that I was going to get a cheap motel room on my pension." I finished it for him. "Or go into a nursing home like your wife suggested." "No, of course not," he countered quickly, but I could hear the falseness in his voice. "We just didn't know you had those kinds of possibilities." "That's the problem, son," I sighed. "There's a lot you don't know about me. You've never tried to find out." There was an awkward pause. I could hear some noise in the background, like Christopher had his hand over the microphone and was talking to someone in a whisper. Most likely to Lorelei, who was standing nearby, telling me what to say. "Dad, we'd like to come and visit you," he said at last, "to see your new house, to talk. Lori would bake your favorite apple pie." I almost laughed. Lorelei, who in 3 years had never once asked me what my favorite foods were, was suddenly going to bake my favorite pie? How touching. "I don't think that's a good idea," I replied. "I need time, Chris. You kicked me out of my own home, and now I'm trying to start a new life. Give me space." "But Dad," he started. "No," I said firmly. "Not now. Maybe later, but not anytime soon." After this conversation, I expected them to leave me alone, at least for a while. But I underestimated Lorelei's persistence. A week later, I got a call from Sylvia Elliott, a neighbor we'd become friends with. "Stanley, darling," she said in her melodious voice, "you didn't tell me you had a son." "What?" I tensed up. "How do you know about my son?" "He came here this morning with his wife," Sylvia explained, "a gorgeous blonde in a designer suit. They were walking around the neighborhood asking about Mr. Higgs, an older gentleman who recently bought a house in this neighborhood. They said you were their father and father-in-law, and they wanted to surprise you for your birthday." It took my breath away. My birthday was 3 months ago, and Christopher knew it perfectly well. They were just looking for an excuse to get my address. "And what did you tell them?" I asked, trying to speak calmly. "Nothing in particular," Sylvia reassured me. "I sensed right away that something was wrong. That woman is too assertive." And her eyes were cold, not like a loving daughter-in-law. "So I told them I thought I'd seen you a couple of times at a cafe downtown, but I don't know where exactly you live." I exhaled a sigh of relief. Sylvia was not only a kind neighbor, but also an insightful woman. "Thank you, Sylvia," I said sincerely. "You're right. My son and his wife and I don't have the best relationship right now. I'd rather they didn't know where I live." "That's what I thought, dear," she sighed understandingly. "Don't worry, your secret is safe. I'll warn Howard and the other neighbors to be careful with the information too." After talking to Sylvia, I felt a mixture of anger and anxiety. Christopher and Lorelei were clearly not going to back down. But what exactly did they want? Did they really want to make up? Or were they only interested in my money? I got the answer to that question the next day. Brad called me with news that made everything clear. "Stanley, you're not going to believe this," he began excitedly. "I just got a call from your sister-in-law." "Lorelei?" I was surprised. "How did she get your number?" "She must have found it in your papers or Christopher's cell phone," Brad suggested. "It didn't matter. The main thing is that she was trying to ask me for details about your financial situation." "What exactly was she asking?" I felt a wave of anger rising inside me. "Everything." Brad seemed exasperated. "How much money you had in your accounts, what investments you had, what your income was. Even asked if you'd changed your will. She was trying to be sly, saying that you and Christopher had supposedly reconciled, and now she wanted to help you manage your money properly in your old age." I clenched my fists until my knuckles turned white. It all made sense now. Lorelei had somehow found out that I was much richer than they thought and had decided to correct her mistake, bring me back into the family to get access to my money. "What did you say to her?" I asked, trying to remain calm. "Nothing, of course," Brad snorted. "I told her I had no right to divulge clients' financial information without their explicit consent. She tried to push, saying she was practically a daughter and had a right to know. But I didn't give in." "Thank you, Brad." I was genuinely grateful. "You're a true friend." "You're welcome," he retorted. "But Stanley, be careful. Your sister-in-law didn't strike me as the kind of person who gives up easily." He was right. The very next day, Christopher called again. This time his voice sounded more insistent. "Dad, we need to talk," he said as soon as I answered. "In person, not over the phone. It's important." "About what exactly?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Oh, our future. About family. About how we can fix things," he stammered, as if he were reading a pre-prepared text. "Lori feels terrible about what happened. She cries every night, saying she made the biggest mistake of her life by turning her back on you." I could barely contain my laughter. Lorelei, who thought I was a burden and said, "There's no room for me in the house," suddenly repented. How conveniently it happened right now, when she found out about my finances. "And when exactly did she realize her mistake?" I inquired. "Before or after she found out I'd bought the house in Greenwich." There was a pause. I could almost see Christopher fidgeting, not knowing what to say. "What's the house got to do with it?" he finally said uncertainly. "We just miss you, Dad. We want our family to be together again." "Where was that desire to be together when you kicked me out of my own house? When you stood by and remained silent while your wife said there was no room for me?" "Dad, it was my fault, I admit." A pleading tone came into his voice. "I should have stood up for you, but I'll make it up to you, I promise. Just give us a chance." I sighed. Perhaps Christopher did feel guilty, but Lorelei, I had no doubt that all she wanted was my money. "Okay," I said after a pause. "You can come over Sunday afternoon. I'll send you the address in the morning the same day." "Thanks, Dad." Christopher sounded genuinely excited. "We'll be sure to come. Lori will bake your favorite pie." When I hung up the phone, I sat motionless for a while, looking out the window at my garden. I knew that the coming meeting would not be pleasant. Lorelei must have prepared a whole show of apologies and tears. Christopher would look guilty and remorseful, all to get his hands on my money. But I was ready for this meeting. In the month I'd spent in my new home, enjoying peace and freedom, I'd rethought a lot of things. I was no longer the resentful old man who had been kicked out of his own home. I was stronger, more confident, and I knew exactly what I wanted out of the rest of my life. On the day of the visit, I got up early to get ready. I texted Christopher the address as promised. Then I put the house in order, even though it was already spotlessly clean, thanks to the housekeeper who came twice a week. I ordered lunch from a good restaurant, and I wasn't going to waste time cooking for Lorelei. The doorbell rang at noon sharp. I took a deep breath, adjusted my shirt, and went to open it. On the doorstep stood Christopher with a large bouquet of flowers and Lorelei with a box in her hands, apparently her favorite pie. Both were dressed as if for a social gathering. Christopher in a strict suit, Lorelei in an elegant dress and impeccable makeup. "Dad!" Christopher exclaimed, stepping forward for a hug. "It's so good to see you." I hugged him discreetly, feeling the tension in his body. He was clearly nervous. "Welcome," I said, pulling away. "Come on in." Lorelei gave me her fake smile and held out a box of pie. "Stanley, I'm so glad to see you," she said with feigned warmth. "I made apple pie, your favorite." I took the box, trying not to show my disgust at the comedy. My favorite pie was blueberry, not apple, and Lorelei couldn't know that because she'd never been interested. "Thank you," I said dryly. "Come into the parlor. Dinner will be served in half an hour." When they entered the spacious hallway of my new home, their reaction was exactly as I'd expected. Lorelei froze, eyes wide, her gaze sliding greedily over the marble floor, the antique furniture, the crystal chandelier. Christopher looked stunned, as if he couldn't believe his stingy father could live in such splendor. "It's amazing," Lorelei breathed out, barely concealing her envy. "I had no idea Greenwich had houses like this." "Oh, it's pretty modest by local standards," I said with a slight smile. "Many of my neighbors live much more luxuriously." I led them into the living room, enjoying the expressions on their faces. The spacious room with its high ceilings, antique furniture, and huge windows overlooking the manicured garden was impressive even to those accustomed to luxury, and Lorelei, for all her pretensions to refined taste, was clearly stunned. "Have a seat," I said, pointing to the sofa. "Would you like something to drink? I have good whiskey, wine, or I can offer tea, coffee." "Whiskey, please," Christopher said quickly, clearly needing something strong to combat his nervousness. "I'll have a glass of wine if I may." Lorelei smiled her fake smile. "What a lovely house, Stanley. How long ago did you buy it?" "About a month ago," I answered, walking over to the bar in the corner of the living room. It was a real mid-20th century antique bar I'd found at a local vintage furniture store. "Right after you kicked me out of my old house." I deliberately reminded them of that, pouring Christopher's whiskey and Lorelei's red wine. I wanted to see their reaction, their embarrassment. Christopher immediately lowered his eyes and Lorelei turned a little pale, but quickly pulled herself together. "We're so sorry about the misunderstanding," she said, taking the glass from my hands. "I wasn't myself at the time. So much stress at work, problems with my bosses. I just didn't know what I was saying." "Really?" I raised an eyebrow, sitting down in the chair across from them. "And I thought you understood every word perfectly, Lorelei." "There's no room for you in the house" is a pretty unambiguous statement, don't you think? "Dad, we're really sorry," Christopher interjected, seeing that his wife was getting nervous. "It was a terrible mistake. I should have stopped Lori, protected you. But I was weak." He looked genuinely remorseful, and for a moment I felt a prick of regret. Maybe my son had really realized his mistake. But then I saw Lorelei put her hand on his knee in a warning gesture, and my doubts dissipated. It was a performance carefully rehearsed at home. "Let's not talk about sad things," Lorelei said, smiling strainedly. "We've missed you so much, Stanley. The house seems empty without you. Don't you think so, darling?" She turned to Christopher, who nodded hastily, taking a large sip of whiskey. "Yes, Dad, we've really missed you," he said, coughing. "How are you settling in here? Do you have any help around the house?" "Yes, a housekeeper comes twice a week," I answered, watching them. "There is also a gardener who takes care of the grounds. Other than that, I manage on my own. At my age, it's good to stay active." "At your age," Lorelei said, "it's also important to have people close to you, a family to take care of you." I almost laughed. Until a month ago, she'd convinced Christopher that I should move into a nursing home because I was too old to live on my own. Now all of a sudden, she's looking out for my well-being. "I'm doing fine," I replied dryly. "I've already made friends here. The neighbors are very friendly. We often go to visit each other. There's a chess club in town that I attend on Wednesdays." "That's wonderful, Dad." Christopher looked genuinely pleased. "I'm glad you're not alone." "But still," Lorelei interjected, "it's not the same as a family. Chris and I were thinking, maybe you'd like to come back to us. Not as a guest, of course. We could convert the first floor into a separate apartment for you, completely independent, with your own entrance. But we'd still be around if you needed help." This is it, I thought. The real reason for their visit. They want me back, but not because they miss me. It's because they now know about my money and want access to it. "That's a very generous offer," I said with a touch of irony, especially considering that not so long ago, There was no room in the house for me. Lorelei blushed slightly but quickly pulled herself together. I already said it was a terrible mistake, she said with a hint of irritation in her voice. Son, we all say things we regret. Haven't you ever been wrong, Stanley? Of course I've made mistakes, I agreed, leaning back in my chair. Like the mistake I made when I let you move into my house, Lorelei. But we learn from our mistakes, don't we? This time she couldn't hide her anger. Her eyes narrowed and her smile became strained. Maybe we should have lunch, Christopher suggested, feeling the tension building. I'm starving from the road. Good idea. I stood up, satisfied that I'd managed to get Lorelei off balance. Come into the dining room. I led them through the hall to a spacious dining room with a large mahogany dining table. The table was already set for three, with expensive china, crystal glasses, and silverware. A couple minutes after we sat down, a young woman in uniform appeared with trays. Here's lunch, I said. I ordered from Le Pangan. They say it's the best French restaurant around. Lorelei could hardly conceal her amazement. She clearly hadn't expected me to live the high life, ordering lunches from expensive restaurants and hiring staff to serve them. That's very nice, she said, as the lobster plate was placed in front of her. But you don't have to go to all that expense for us, Stanley. I could have cooked something. That's all right, I smiled. I can afford it. At lunch, the conversation was strained. Christopher tried to talk about his work, about some changes in the office, but I could see that his thoughts were far away. Lorelei tried to be charming, asking me about the house, about my neighbors, about my new life. But behind every question she asked, I sensed a calculation, a desire to find out how rich I was and how she could gain access to that wealth. How's my old house doing? I asked when dessert was served. Did you turn my office into a yoga room like you planned? Lorelei flinched faintly, and Christopher choked on his wine. No, of course not, she said quickly. We left everything as it was. Your office is waiting for you, Stanley. Really? I raised an eyebrow. What about all my stuff? My books, my papers, my pictures of Evelyn? We kept everything, Lorelei assured me, though I could see the panic in her eyes. They'd probably long ago thrown away or sold most of the things I'd left behind. Everything is waiting for your return. I nodded, pretending to believe her. In truth, I didn't really care. I took everything that was really important with me. Evelyn's pictures, our family albums, my favorite books and personal papers. The rest could be replaced. After lunch, we moved back to the living room, where I offered coffee and brandy. Lorelei became even more subservient, complimenting everything from my choice of furniture to the view from the windows. You have terrific taste, Stanley, she said, examining the antique clock on the mantel. I always knew you were a connoisseur of fine things, but this house exceeded all expectations. I nodded silently, watching her. She walked around the living room, touching things, assessing their value. Her gaze was that of an appraiser at an auction, not an admiring guest. It must be lonely for you in such a large house, she continued, sitting down next to me on the couch. Too close for my comfort. 5 bedrooms and all empty. Chris and I could stay for the weekend sometimes, keep you company. This is it, I thought. The first step toward gradually moving in here and taking over my house like they did with the last one. I appreciate the offer, I said, moving away from her. But like I said, I have a lot of friends here. I don't feel alone. And yet, she didn't back down. Family is family. No one will take care of you like family people do. Like how you took care of me by kicking me out of my own home, I asked with a smile. Lorelei was speechless for a moment, but then she pulled herself together. We've already apologized for the misunderstanding, she said with pressure. Sean, how many more times do we have to apologize? This isn't about apologies, Lorelei. I shook my head. It's about trust. You and Christopher betrayed my trust, and now you come here, seeing that I have money, and suddenly you want to take care of me. Doesn't that seem like a bit of a convenient coincidence? Christopher, who until that moment had been sitting silently in the chair, suddenly raised his voice. Dad, it's not like that, he said with pain in his voice. I really regret what happened. I'm ashamed that I didn't stand up for you, and I want to make it right. I looked at my son and saw sincerity in his eyes. Perhaps he was truly sorry. But Lorelei, She was only interested in my money. It was obvious. Chris, I believe you're sorry, I said softly, but some things can't just be fixed. Trust takes years to build, but it's broken in seconds, and it's a lot harder to rebuild than it is to lose. But we have to at least try, he insisted. You're my father. I don't want that wall between us. I sighed. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to give him a chance. But the other part, the wiser part, reminded me that as long as Lorelei was around him, nothing would change. She would always manipulate him, and he would always choose her side. Let's change the subject, I suggested, not wanting to continue this conversation. How are things at the office, Chris? You mentioned some changes. The rest of the visit passed in awkward small talk. Lorelei continued to look around the house, complimenting me and insinuating that I needed help managing such a large household. Christopher looked increasingly depressed, realizing that our relationship wasn't going to be easily repaired. When it was time to say goodbye, Lorelei made one last attempt. Stanley, think about our offer, she said, standing in the doorway. You could come home to your family, or we could move here, help you. There's enough room in this house for all of us. I looked at her fake smile, at the calculating glint in her eyes, and all I felt was tired. I'll think about it, I said, not intending to. Thanks for the visit. Christopher hugged me goodbye, and I felt him shiver. I love you, Dad, he whispered in my ear. Please don't forget that. I patted his back, not responding to the confession. A part of me still loved my son, but right now that love was buried under layers of pain and disappointment. As their car disappeared around the corner of the driveway, I went back into the house and sat in my favorite chair by the window, looking out at the garden lit by the evening sun. I felt strangely devastated after their visit. Christopher and Lorelei's visit had awakened many conflicting emotions in me. On the one hand, I was glad to see how shocked they were by my new home and lifestyle. It was a kind of revenge to show them that I didn't need their pity or help, that I could live perfectly well without them. On the other hand, I was bitter to realize that Lorelei was only interested in my money. She didn't even try to hide her greed, estimating the value of every item in my house, hinting that she could help me manage all that wealth. As for Christopher, he looked genuinely remorseful. In his eyes, I saw shame and regret. But would that be enough? Would he ever be able to free himself from his wife's influence? I doubted it. Lorelei had a power over him that I never understood. She manipulated him, using his feelings for me as a weapon. I remembered her sitting next to me on the couch, too close, her perfume too strong, her smile too wide. Everything about her was fake, from her concern for my well-being to her apologies for past mistakes. She wasn't sorry for kicking me out of the house. She was only sorry that she didn't know about my money at the time, and now she wanted to make up for that mistake, to bring me back to my family, to gain access to my fortune, and eventually, probably, to my new home. I could almost hear her planning it in her head. First the frequent weekend visits, then the offer to stay with me temporarily, and eventually I'd be made redundant in my own home again. But I wasn't about to let that happen. In the month I lived here, I realized one important thing. I didn't need their family. I had friends Sylvia and Howard, Theodore from the bookstore, even Patrick, my realtor, whom we sometimes met for lunch. These people accepted me for who I was, not because of my money or opportunities, but simply because they enjoyed my company. At my age, I finally realized that a real family doesn't have to be bound by blood. A real family is those who care for you, respect you, accept you with all your imperfections. And if my own son couldn't be that kind of family, I would find it elsewhere. I got up from my chair and walked over to the window, looking out at my garden, at the sunset coloring the sky in shades of pink and gold. This house was my new beginning, my fortress, and I would not let Lorelei or anyone else take it from me. Tomorrow I'll call my lawyer and amend my will as planned. Christopher will no longer be my sole heir. He'll probably get something, a small amount, enough to live comfortably, but not a luxury. The rest, I had other plans for the rest. I spent the next day after Christopher and Lorelei's visit in reflection. Their arrival had stirred up many of the feelings I'd been diligently suppressing for the past month. Resentment, frustration, anger. But now I was adding contempt to them. Contempt for Lorelei for her unconcealed greed and falsity, and, bitter as it was to admit, for Christopher's weakness. I took a long walk in the garden, thinking about what I would say to them the next time they met. Lorelei was not one to give up easily, especially when money was involved. And indeed, the very next morning I got a call from Christopher. "Dad," he began without preamble, "we'd like to come see you again. We'd like to have a serious, no-holds-barred conversation. Lori's got the papers ready." "Papers?" I interrupted him. "What papers?" "Well," he hesitated, "just some ideas on how we could help you manage your finances. Nothing big. Just, talk." I grinned. Lorelei clearly hadn't wasted any time. Already she'd prepared documents, probably giving them access to my accounts or real estate. How predictable. "Okay," I agreed. "Come back tomorrow afternoon. I have something I'd like to discuss with you too." Christopher was clearly pleased with my agreement, unaware of what was really in store for them. "Great. We'll be there at 1 o'clock, just like yesterday. Lori is very glad you're ready to have a serious conversation." I'm sure she was. She was probably already imagining how she'd handle my money, how she'd move into my house, how she'd brag about her rich father-in-law to her friends. After talking to Christopher, I called my attorney, Eleanor Patterson. We had worked together for many years, and I trusted her completely. I explained the situation and asked her to come over tomorrow at 2 o'clock. I wanted her to be present for our family conversation. "Are you sure you want to do it this way, Stanley?" she asked after listening to me. "It could lead to a complete breakdown of the relationship with my son." "It's already broken, Eleanor," I sighed. "And not by me. I just want to set the record straight so there are no illusions or false expectations." She agreed and promised to have all the necessary documents ready by tomorrow. The morning of the decisive day I met with surprising calmness. The excitement I had felt the day before was gone, giving way to a firm conviction that I had made the right decision. I was no longer angry at Christopher and Lorelei. I just wanted to close this stage of my life and move on. I ate breakfast on the terrace, enjoying the warm sunny day, then did a little work in the garden. It always helped me gather my thoughts. By noon I had showered, put on a fresh shirt and pants, and waited for my guests to arrive. At exactly 1 o'clock, Christopher's car appeared in the driveway. They arrived even earlier than I had expected, which spoke volumes about their impatience. Lorelei got out of the car first, dressed in an elegant business suit, as if she were going to an important negotiation. In her hands she carried a leather folder of documents. Christopher followed her as usual, looking a little uncertain. "Stanley, how nice to see you again," Lorelei exclaimed when I opened the door. Her smile was even wider than yesterday, and her eyes were literally burning with anticipation. "We thought so much about our conversation." "I'm sure we did," I replied dryly as I let them in. "Come into the study where we can talk more comfortably." I led them into my study, a spacious room with a large oak desk, leather armchairs, and bookcases along the walls. Here I usually worked on documents, read, and sometimes just meditated, looking out the window at the garden. "Have a seat," I suggested, pointing to the chairs in front of the desk. "Would you like something to drink? Coffee, tea?" "No, thank you," Lorelei answered quickly, clearly wanting to get straight to the point. "We have a very interesting proposition for you, Stanley." I sat down in the chair at the table, looking at them. Lorelei looked like a predator ready to pounce. Christopher like a man walking to the scaffold. "Before we begin," I said calmly, "I want to warn you that my attorney, Eleanor Patterson, will be joining us in an hour. I have some legal matters I'd like to discuss in her presence." Lorelei was confused for a moment, but quickly pulled herself together. "A lawyer?" she asked, trying to hide her concern. "Why do we need a lawyer for a family conversation? We're not strangers, Stanley." "It's because we're family, Lorelei, that I want this to be done legally," I replied. "But let's not get ahead of ourselves. You said you had a proposal?" She hesitated for a second, then nodded decisively and opened her folder. "Yes, Chris and I have been thinking a lot about your situation," she began, pulling out some papers. "You're single, living in a big house, managing a considerable fortune. That's a lot of responsibility at your age. We want to help." "And how exactly do you plan to help?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "We're proposing a family trust," she explained, placing the document in front of me. You will transfer your major assets, home, investments, bank accounts into this trust. Chris and I will be co-trustees, helping you manage it all. This will safeguard your wealth and ensure that you will always be taken care of. I picked up the document and took a quick look at it. As I expected, it was a draft agreement whereby I was effectively handing over control of all my assets to Christopher and Lorelei. They would become the guardians of my fortune and would be authorized to make financial decisions on my behalf in the event of my incapacity, which, by the way, they could determine. That's very thoughtful of you, I said, putting the papers aside. And who drew up this document? My cousin, he's a lawyer, Lorelei answered quickly. It's perfectly legal and standard. Many families in your position set up trusts like this. In my situation, I asked with a slight smile. What position? Well, you know, she hesitated. At an age when you need the support of loved ones, when it becomes burdensome to manage a large fortune on your own. I nodded, pretending to consider her words seriously. What will happen to my house and my money if I sign these papers? I asked. Nothing much, she exclaimed with feigned indignation. Everything will be yours, of course. We'll just help you with the management. Perhaps we'll move in with you so we can be close to you. This house is too big for one person. I nodded again, looking at Christopher, who had been silent the whole time, eyes downcast. He clearly felt uncomfortable letting his wife have this conversation. What do you think about this proposal, Chris? I asked directly. It's your idea, isn't it? He looked up and I saw a mixture of shame and fear in his eyes. Yeah, I think it's our responsibility to take care of you, Dad, he mumbled. Lori just wants to help. Of course, I smiled, leaning back in my chair. You know, I really appreciate your concern, especially since you kicked me out of my own house a month ago, saying there's no room for me there. Lorelei turned slightly pale but quickly pulled herself together. We've already explained that it was a terrible mistake, she said with pressure. I wasn't myself. A lot of stress at work. Yeah, I remember those explanations, I interrupted her. And you know, I don't hold a grudge. I really don't. They both looked at me in surprise, clearly not expecting this turn of events. I'm not mad at you, I continued, because thanks to you, I've finally realized a few important things. First, that money is the only thing you care about, Lorelei. And second, that my son will never have the courage to stand up to you, even when you blatantly manipulate him and me. That's not fair, Lorelei exclaimed, her face flushed with anger. We came with sincere intentions. With the sincere intention of gaining access to my money, I finished for her. Let's be honest with each other, at least for now. You kicked me out because you thought I was a burden and didn't have any money. Now that you know I'm rich, you're suddenly repentant and want to take care of me. That's not caring, Lorelei. That's greed. Christopher looked like I'd punched him. Lorelei straightened in her chair, her eyes narrowed. You're wrong, Stanley, she said coldly. We do care about you, but if you don't want to accept our help, we can't make you. And you're right, you can't, I agreed. But I want you to know a few facts before we end this conversation. First, I've always been financially successful. All my life I've invested wisely, saved where I needed to, and built up a solid fortune. I just didn't flaunt it, didn't spend money on luxuries and show-offs like you do, Lorelei. She opened her mouth to object, but I held up my hand to stop her. Secondly, I am fully capable and do not need guardians to manage my finances. I have an excellent financial advisor, attorney, and tax professional. They have been helping me manage my affairs for years. At this point, the doorbell rang. I looked at the clock. 2 o'clock. Eleanor had arrived right on schedule. I'm sorry, that must be my lawyer, I said, standing up. I'll be right back. I walked out of the office, leaving them puzzled. Eleanor was waiting at the front door with a briefcase in her hands. She was an elegant woman in her 50s with a sharp mind and an impeccable reputation in legal circles. Hello, Stanley, she said when I opened the door. Everything is ready as you requested. I have the paperwork with me. Thank you, Eleanor. I ushered her into the office. Allow me to introduce you to my son Christopher and his wife Lorelei. Christopher awkwardly rose to shake hands, while Lorelei remained seated with a cold nod. She was clearly uncomfortable with the appearance of a professional lawyer at their family reunion. Please have a seat, Eleanor, I suggested, pointing to the chair next to me. We were just discussing some family matters. Eleanor sat down, opened her briefcase, and pulled out some documents, which she placed in front of me. This is what we talked about yesterday, she said. Everything is prepared according to your instructions. I nodded and turned to Christopher and Lorelei. As I began to say, I don't need a guardian to manage my finances, I continued. In fact, I've decided to live apart from you and run my own affairs. This house will remain mine, and I don't plan to invite anyone else to live here permanently. Lorelei looked like she was about to explode with anger. Christopher, on the other hand, seemed simply lost. As for my estate and inheritance, I picked up the papers Eleanor had brought. I've made significant changes to my will. Christopher, you are no longer my sole heir. What? He exclaimed, finally showing some emotion. But Dad, I'm your only child. Yes, you are my only child, I agreed, and that's why I'm leaving you a part of my fortune, a sum sufficient for a comfortable life. But no more than that. To whom are you leaving the rest? Lorelei asked, her voice trembling with ill-concealed anger. You have no other relatives. That's not entirely true, I smiled. I have a new family, the people who took me in and took care of me when you turned your back. Sylvia and Howard Elliott, my neighbors, who alerted me to your inquiries. Theodore from the bookstore, with whom I play chess every week, and a few other people who have grown closer to me this month than you have in years. You're leaving your fortune to strangers? Christopher looked shocked. That's crazy. No, son, it's my choice, I said firmly. Besides, a lot of my money will go to charity, to the Pancreatic Cancer Research Fund your mother died of, and to an educational fund for underprivileged children. Evelyn would have loved it. Lorelei jumped up from her seat, her face contorted with rage. You can't do this, she screamed. It's our family's money. Chris is entitled to it. Actually, he does, Eleanor intervened calmly. Mr. Higgs is fully competent, and it's his personal property. He has every right to dispose of it as he sees fit. We'll contest the will, Lorelei said threateningly. We'll prove that he was incapacitated when he made it. You can try, Eleanor shrugged. But I have 2 independent psychiatrists' reports on Mr. Higgs's full capacity. So good luck in court. Lorelei looked like she was about to explode. She turned to Christopher, who was still sitting in a daze. Say something, she demanded. It's your father. He's disinheriting us. Christopher slowly raised his eyes and looked at me. Suddenly I saw something in his gaze that I hadn't seen in a long time understanding. A realization. It was as if the veil had lifted from his eyes and he finally saw the situation for what it was. He's right, Lori, he said quietly. It's our own fault. We kicked him out of the house, and now we've come for his money. It's disgusting. Lorelei stared at him as if he'd hit her. Did you take his side? She hissed. After everything I've done for you? For us? What exactly did you do, Lori? Christopher asked, and there was a hardness in his voice that I'd never heard before. Manipulated me, made me choose between you and my father? Tricked me into saying you cared about your family when really you were only interested in money? I watched this scene with a mixed feeling of surprise and pride. Maybe there was something of me in my son after all. The same ability to finally see the truth, no matter how bitter it was. Lorelei, however, was not about to give up. You're going to regret this, she said, looking at me with hatred. Both of you will. I'm going to file for divorce and take everything I can from Chris. And then we'll see who kicked who out of the house. With these words, she grabbed her bag and a folder with documents and flew out of the office. A few seconds later, we heard the front door slam. Silence reigned in the office. Christopher sat with his head down, Eleanor delicately flipping through her papers, pretending not to notice the awkwardness of the situation. Dad, Christopher finally said, raising his eyes. Yeah, I don't know what to say. You're right about everything. I was weak. I let Lorelei manipulate me. I betrayed you. I have no excuse. I looked at my son and saw him not as the confident man he'd been trying to be for the past few years, but as a little boy afraid to disappoint his father. We all make mistakes, Chris, I said softly. The important thing is not that you fall, but that you find the strength to get back up. He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. I want to make it right, he said. Not for the money, I swear. It's just, you're my father, and I don't want to lose you. I sighed. Part of me wanted to forgive him right away, to hug him, to tell him everything would be okay. But the other part, the wiser part, knew that true forgiveness and rebuilding a relationship took time and work. Let's start small, I suggested. You come home, sort out your life, and then when you're ready, we'll talk again. No rush, no pressure, just father and son. Christopher nodded, wiping away the tears. Thank you, Dad, he said quietly. I won't let you down again. I promise. When Christopher left, Eleanor and I stayed in the office, finalizing the paperwork. Are you sure you want to proceed with the changes to the will? She asked. After what happened today, I'm absolutely sure, I replied firmly. Christopher will get his share as we planned, but the rest will go to those who really deserve help. Eleanor nodded and continued filling out the forms. When all the documents were signed, she gathered them into a briefcase and stood up. You know, Stanley, she said, looking at me with respect, not many people would have the courage to do what you did today. It takes real courage. Not courage, Eleanor, I smiled. Just clarity. When you know what you really want out of life, it's much easier to make decisions. After Eleanor left, I went out onto the terrace with a glass of whiskey and sat in my favorite chair, looking out at the garden in the evening sun. I felt a strange calmness, as if a heavy weight had fallen from my shoulders. Yes, today had not been an easy day. I had seen the true face of Lorelei, a cold, calculating woman who would do anything for money. But I also saw a glimmer of hope in Christopher. Maybe my son is finally starting to see the world for what it is, not through the rose-colored glasses his wife has put on him. Will our relationship ever be the same again? I don't think so. Too much has been said and done. Too many bridges have been burned. But maybe we could build something new. A relationship based on mutual respect and understanding, rather than commitment and guilt. In the meantime, I had my new life, my home, my friends, my plans for the future. At 67, I finally felt truly free, free from the expectations of others, from having to conform to other people's standards, from the burden of responsibility for those who didn't appreciate it. I took a sip of whiskey, savoring the warmth spilling over my body. Tomorrow would be a new day, and I would greet it with an open heart, ready for new opportunities and adventures. After all, life doesn't end at 67. For me, it was just beginning.